narrative, of course, and a very popular sort of more left-wing leaning narrative is that death penalty doesn't actually decrease the murder rate. Whereas actually, the countries that they're using to say that have all but abolished the death sentence.
We've seen how pharmaceutical companies have essentially poisoned millions of people across the globe with opioids and various other synthetic drugs.
Hello! Welcome to the Torture Trap. I'm in Dissonance Trap, where we will be discussing some topical, controversial, and challenging subject matters that are designed to induce cognitive pain.
You're listening to myself, Gav, my good friend Josh, as we facilitate this ride once again into the void of the absurd.
Oh yes, here we go. It's gonna hurt. Yeah, I'm all right. Today we're doing punishment. Punishment. And we're gonna kinky stuff. We're gonna get stuck right in. I'm gonna chuck you right in to my new show. Who wants to be an emperor? You're the best in the world. You're gonna make it to the top and be nothing like that. Oh, some make you are or miracle. Here we go. You're an emperor of doom and destruction. You're so cruel and cool.
Yes, and welcome to Who Wants to Be an Emperor, where our guests today will be with a chance of becoming Emperor of England. Please welcome Gavin to the show.
Guten Tag, and English, yes.
How are you feeling today, Gavin?
Sehr gut. I mean, very good. Excellent. I am well prepared to become monarch of this wonderful island.
That's good. I'm sure you've watched the show from home before, Gavin. Big fan?
Well, obviously. Yeah, great fan.
So you're going to get asked a series of questions, and you'll have an A answer, B, a C, or D. All you've got to do is select which one you think it is, all right? And you've got 50-50, and you've got phone a friend. You know how it works. All right. So the first question is, what was the most common method of execution in England from 1352 until its abolishment in 1870? Was it A, the rack, which would have been used for stretching you out, dislocating the victim's limbs? So was it B, hung, drawn, and quartered, where you'd be hung to the point of death? Then you'd have your penis cut off. Then they make a horizontal incision across the abdomen to disembowel you, and then your guts would be put into a fire. Or was it C, the Judas chair, which is like a pointy chair that you're pulled down over and basically cut in half? Or was it D, the nice one, boiling her alive, one of Henry VIII's favourites? So which one are you going for, Gavin? What are you thinking?
To be honest, the one I think isn't there. So I'm going to go for my reserve answer, which would be B, hung, drawn, and quartered.
You're going for B, are you, Gavin?
I am.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, I am absolutely sure.
You don't want to use phone a friend if you've got any, or 50-50?
No, I'm confident in my answer.
All right, Gavin, you've said B. You're through to the next round. It is B. Yes, indeed. The last hung, drawn, and quarter was in 1870, but you're bang on there.
Really, in 1870? That's
yes.
Nuts, man. That's nuts.
Well, I suppose it is nuts, or you'll be losing them. But you're through to the next round. All right.
Okay, excellent. I've still got my lifelines.
You've got all your lifelines. So, question number 2. You're halfway there. You're nearly an emperor of England. Okay. Which form of execution has been happening consistently since 1189 all the way up, yes, all the way to 2007? 2007. Is it A, the head crusher, a Middle Ages favourite normally applied until death, but not before your eyes pop out and the jaw is crushed? Was it B, tarred and feathered, normally a punishment for theft? Or was it C, sawn in half, normally from the groin to the skull, often tied upside down so the rush of blood to the head would be more likely to keep you alive? Very nice. Or is it D, flaying, This is where the torturer removes bits of your skin, and death can take a couple of hours to a few days. So, what do you think, Gavin?
Actually, sure with this one. Again, the one I'd assume is on there isn't on there, so I'm going to have to 50-50, please. I want two of the answers eliminated.
You're going for 50-50. Okay,
Yes,
that's one of your lifelines. Let's reduce them. Okay, you've got option number 1, sawn in half, and option number 2, tarred and feathered.
Are these my remaining options, yeah?
These are your remaining options, Gavin.
Okay, I'm going to go for option 2, tarring and feathering. I'm pretty sure that still happens in the Middle East, so I'm going to go for that as my answer. Please.
Are you sure, Gavin? You
Yes.
want to go? Are you sure you don't want to change your mind?
No, I am absolutely sure. I want to be tarred and feathered, please.
Oh, Gavin. You're through to the next round. It is tarred and feathered.
Excellent.
You're doing so well, Gavin. You are one step away from being an emperor. What do you think it's going to be like being an emperor if you win that?
Well, I'm quite looking forward to my throne of skulls.
Sounds fantastic. So, question number 3. No pressure. Which of the following execution methods was designed to prolong the process of death? Now, I'm going to give you an extra answer on here. So, is it A, grill iron? And the grill iron was something that you were locked into a giant grill and slowly cooked over gently burning coals with some fava beans and a nice bottle of Chianti? Or is it B, crushing, where you'd have a board placed over your chest and then weights are added incrementally, normally used to extract a confession? You can then get that weight off your chest. Or is it C, the Catherine wheel, where you're placed on a large wooden wheel and a guy would smack your limbs with a giant bat, crushing bits and bobs through the spokes? Or is it D, burning at the stake, like the witches described in the Malleus Maleficarum in 1487? Or is it E, which is Ling Chi, or death by 1,000 cuts, practiced up until the 20th century in China? What are you going to go for, Gavin? Where's your mind at here?
I'm going to go for the option. I'm going to say B, crushing. Was that option B, being crushed by a board?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that takes the longest. I mean, being crushed by a board obviously isn't a particularly heavy item, but it will kill you eventually if you put enough stones on it. So, yeah, I'm torn though, because I suppose death by 1,000 cuts would be quite long as well. Can I phone a friend?
You can. Have you got someone in mind?
I don't have any friends though. I'm just going to have to phone
You could pick someone in
myself.
history, or...
I could do. I'm just going to phone myself in a slightly different time period, and then hopefully myself will tell me the answer.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just see if yourself is available a minute. Oh, it's ringing. I'll talk to him first.
Hello.
Hello. Is that Gavin from the future?
Yes, this is I from the future, many decades in the future.
Gavin, you never believe who's on the line and wants to speak to you.
I remember this well.
You're actually live on Who Wants to Be an Emperor Air, Gavin.
Don't get in the green car! Don't get in the green car!
Please don't say fuck or bollocks. Gavin.
I just heard him shout something, and then he got cut off. I'm going to choose option E, death by 1,000 cuts.
You're going for E.
Yeah.
Do you think your future Gavin would have said that?
I'm not sure. Let's just go for option E. Let's forget I ever spoke to myself in the
Gavin,
future.
you're playing to become the Emperor of England here. Do you sure you want to link in Ling Chi? That's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah. I'm going to go for option E, please. A death by 1,000 cuts.
Final answer.
Which is what this podcast currently feels like.
Is that final answer?
Yeah, please, just bring this nightmare to an end.
Okay. Gavin, I'm very, very sorry, but congratulations, you are now the Emperor of England!
Yes! Get in
Here
there,
is
everyone that ever
tell you
told me
all
I
about
couldn't
it.
do anything.
Here is Steve to tell you all about it.
Well, he is one lucky man indeed, Josh, because Gavin is now inheriting the crumbling post-apocalyptic kingdom of England, where later we will revisit Emperor Gavin at the arena where he will preside over the first public appearance as Emperor and decide the death sentence for some rather unfortunate people. Back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Steve. How are you feeling, Gavin? I bet
I'm
you're
feeling
top
great.
of the world.
I'm feeling great. And the first thing I'm going to do is take you outside and put a bullet between your eyes. You're
Oh,
a terrible
no.
host. Get outside. Guards! Guards!
That's all for now. No. All hail the Emperor.
What do you think about capital punishment in today's modern society? Because I know that last podcast we discussed, or last couple of podcasts really, in this crime sort of trilogy that we're making, we did discuss offences, didn't we? We discussed a lot of offences. We discussed serial killing, and we discussed, well, essentially what I would class as corporate serial killing, where a corporation kills indigenous people or kills a large number of people, say like by the Bhopal industrial accident or by deforestation. And we said they're kind of the same, aren't they? So if we go to capital punishment now as a sort of extreme end of the punishment scale, I mean, do you think that we should bring it back? I mean, I know in the West, I know in America they still use it in a small degree. They have the death penalty, don't they? But let's stick to, say, Europe and the UK now, where largely it's been abolished. Do you think it should be brought back, or?
Oh, that's one of the ultimate questions, isn't it? And actually, you bring us on to the next part, possibly, because I've actually been looking at countries that still have the death penalty. But what I was looking at is the top 10 countries with homicides.
Okay. So the 10 countries with the most homicides. Yeah.
5 of them have the death penalty.
Okay.
And 4 of them don't, right? Now, the reason I was looking at this is because the claim is by sort of human rights organizations, and one was called Reprieve, who are like investigators, lawyers, and campaigners and all that, who are who say they're fighting for human rights and marginalized people, right? They are claiming that the top 5 countries where they have the death penalty have higher rates of homicide than the top 5 highest homicide rates of countries that do not impose it. So they're saying that the top 5 countries with highest homicide rates, that a death penalty doesn't deter it. If we look at that for a minute, we think, okay, so, well, that means the death penalty isn't actually that effective. And that's what they're trying to convey. However, I did a bit more digging into this because they're trying to use global homicide rates to support their side of the argument, but the findings are like statistically marginal. For example, so look at like Honduras is the most violent place in the world with a homicide rate of nearly 45 per 100,000 people. And that's in 2019. So that means 13 people are murdered every day, right?
Right.
Now, they don't have the death penalty.
So they don't have the death penalty, and yet it's the most violent place on earth. So already I can see some pretty selective statistical management from the amnesty groups there, because they're not looking at like the realities on the ground, are they? Because Honduras is part of the US drug war era, and it's impoverished and so on. Sorry, I'm jumping way ahead. Sorry, continue.
No, you're right. Well, that's where we're going with it. Remember, the narrative is that countries with no death penalty have lower rates of homicide. That's what they're trying to convey. So next beneath that, only just is Jamaica, which has the death penalty. And they recorded 1,300 killings in 2020. And they had the region's highest homicide rate at 46 per 100,000 people. So they're counted as a country that has the death penalty. However, here's where it gets really interesting. I had to do extra digging to find this. Guess when they last executed someone?
Well, I'm going to say it's probably when they had a really unstable dictator whose name escapes me. So I'm going to say sometime in the 80s.
Yeah, you're bang on. 88.
Yeah.
So there's something cheeky there. They're saying that these countries that have death penalty have higher rates of homicide. Actually, this country doesn't have and hasn't.
So they have the death penalty, but they haven't used it in 45 years.
Yeah,
basically.
It's pretty much
35 years. Yeah,
it's pretty much defunct. It's de facto abolished.
It's just on the statute books, just because.
Yeah, exactly. So the next one we take is Venezuela, which has no death penalty. And last year it closed with an estimated 16,000 murders at a rate of 60.3 per 100,000
inhabitants. These don't have any relation to the death penalty, do they? These numbers aren't about the country's law system. It's about the inequality and the economic situation in the country, isn't it? And the cultural normality
Yeah.
that engenders. It's nothing to do with having the death penalty, really, is it?
I think you're right.
Purely from a sort of deterministic viewpoint,
Yeah.
then yeah. I mean, look at Venezuela. Venezuela has been under siege by the Americans for the best part of, I don't know, 10 years or something. I mean, it's terribly run anyway by the socialist government in charge, but it's also trapped between a rock and a hard place.
It is, you're right. Yeah. It has like a lot of pressure on it from America. But yeah, again, you can see that there's this narrative building about this. And another point I'd say about this is that it's interesting because what we see is crime increased under Hugo Chavez, who's a socialist, but even Jamaica, it's currently run by the Jamaica Labour Party, which is actually right wing. It seems that it doesn't matter if they're right or left wing either, that murder is still an issue and inequality is an issue. So the next country was El Salvador, which has the death penalty. And in 2020, El Salvador logged 700 murders, or about 3 a day. So the tally is a big drop from the 1,630 murders that occurred in 2019. But again, the last execution, have a guess when it was.
1990?
Okay, yeah, we're a little bit further back. So 1973.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and interestingly, crime has come down under their right-wing government. But I'd say it doesn't really matter if they're left or right. It's just lots of things that probably go into factoring into that. And again, like, I'm not trying to make a left or right-wing point here. I just think it's interesting. So next is Guatemala, which also has the death penalty. And in 2020, there was a total of 2,575 homicides at a murder rate of 15.3 per 100,000, right? During Alejandro Giametti's first year in office, I think I pronounce it now. So they have the death penalty, but they're a little bit different because they use lethal injection, and that was last used in 2020 for kidnap.
Okay.
But again, very low rates. Before that, it was something like a couple of years, and the death penalty is declining, basically.
That's universal, isn't it? I mean, there's not many countries now that essentially kill you for minor indiscretions. I mean, I suppose the nation state that used the death penalty most is probably that of ISIL in the Levant, wasn't it? For its brief period of existence, where they essentially used terror to keep people in line. So I would say that that's probably the state that used the death penalty most within living memory.
So next is Trinidad and Tobago, which has the death penalty. They recorded 539 murders nationwide in 2019, and they do have the death penalty, but last execution, 1999.
Okay.
So next is Colombia, no death penalty. They recorded 326 murders in 2020.
Seems quite a small number, really, for a country like Colombia, doesn't it? I'm surprised at that.
That is low, but there is a lower population. So it's 9.3 per 100,000. So that's low. Next is Lesotho. This nation recorded 326 murders in 2020, and
death penalty or not?
Abolished pretty much, but not officially. So South Africa, no death penalty, but had 21,000 murders, 58 people a day.
What's the percentage?
In 2020.
What's the percentage per 100,000?
36 per 100K.
Yeah, so that's pretty high for a large country as South Africa, isn't it? But again, we're coming back to the same point over and over, isn't it? It's about the haves and the have-nots, and it's about the disparity in equality, almost, isn't it?
There is that.
Encourages and it adds fuel to the fire, doesn't it? I'm not saying that being poor makes you violent, but I'm saying that it certainly is a predisposer towards being in a position that forces you or encourages you to use violence to get things that you need.
Yeah, the main thing I'm going for is the last one is St. Kitts and Nevis, 2012. They have a rate of 33.6 per 100,000.
Caribbean island,
that's the 8th highest in the world. But the last execution was 2008. So where I'm going is actually when you ask, am I for or against the death penalty? Well, I'm not sure at the moment, because the narrative, of course, and a very popular sort of more left-wing leaning narrative is that death penalty doesn't actually decrease the murder rate. Whereas actually the countries that they're using to say that have all but abolished the death sentence. So when we look at countries that are sentencing the most people to death, we have like Nigeria. Well, this is by 2014, where it's 659 people. Egypt, 509 people to death per year.
Are these people they actually executed in any 1 year? Okay.
Yeah. United States was at 72, and it's gone down significantly, even under Donald Trump. It went down significantly in America. The big one, of course, is China and North Korea, where we don't have data. But I would argue that generally, if I was in that mindset to go out and kill, I would probably see the death penalty as a deterrent personally. Now, not everyone is going to do that. Well, what do you think?
So you would say that it is a deterrent to...
I think so, yeah.
Okay, yes, I'm not sure I'd agree there. I mean, obviously having a strong criminal code will probably dissuade some, but I still think that the factors that lead people into criminality in the first place, I think, are almost inescapable. If we look at the worst instances, like we talked about last week, yeah, so if we look at the serial killer type, where the combination of inherited genetic characteristics and an abusive and impoverished upbringing sort of coalesce to create this ideal conditions of sociopathy and violence towards other people here. And I think that is almost inescapable for some people, or for a small percentage of people who actually commit these violent crimes. And it's the same at the other end of the scale. So those in the positions of power, the dictators, the Chinese Politburo, the North Korean family dynasty, the Kim Il-sung family dynasty. Like, once you're in that position, then, I mean, obviously it's slightly different if we look at it in terms of death penalty, because they are enforcing the death penalty, but we can look at them along a similar sort of moralistic, relativistic lines here. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not sure it makes any difference, because the stats you've given me say that essentially it doesn't make any difference.
Well, it's negligible. However, the thing we don't know there is that if those countries don't have the death penalty, would crime be worse? So, for example, China, that we don't really have data on, you could argue, and quite logically, and say, well, if we don't have the death penalty, then crime could increase. So that's the problem there with the measurement of that.
Is that actually an assessment that could be borne out in logic? Because I know that we no longer have the death penalty in the United Kingdom, for example, and I would say that actually statistically crime has not increased by any severe measure in this country at all. I mean, obviously we've reclassified crimes, interestingly, to make sure that the overall numbers are down. I mean, successive governments have done that. It's part of the corruption of politics that we've discussed many times here on this podcast.
Well, yeah, so you can't really say that crime is going down when you've just sort of queried how those crimes are actually being recorded. And the issue here is we're talking about reported crime, so they changed the measure to reported crime. So, and again, that's what those countries seem to do, is they are saying that reported crime is going down. But actually, is that a real indication of how much crime is going on? No, it's not. Well, put it this way. If you were going to go out and kill someone, then you may just go around and do it. But for some people, they take that logical step and go, hang on, well, I know I'm going to die, so I either have to accept that death or not go through with it. And I'd say even from that basis, it would act as a deterrent, but it's very arbitrary. It's very subjective and hard to prove. But if someone came and killed someone you loved, like your parents, does that person deserve to die?
Well, we've conducted a thought experiment before, haven't we? Where you asked me, would I essentially kill someone in cold blood who had killed one of my family members in cold blood, or even hot blood, let's say. And I still... You
don't have to kill them, but do you think they should be punished?
So yeah, in our first thought experiment, I wasn't really sure because I couldn't really put myself in that position. But if we're taking this as a different experiment, and let's say we use the arm of the law to arbitrarily pass judgment, then I don't know, I guess you've got to be 100% sure of a conviction, haven't you? And I think that's very difficult, even in modern law, even with our DNA testing and with our emphasis on, especially in the West, our emphasis on crime detection and procedures. They're usually quite spot on. But I mean, there's so many miscarriages of justice often where police simply are looking for a conviction. So they'll convict the easily convictable, impoverished sort of ghetto dweller. They say, well, I will finger this guy. And that's been going on for years. That's standard coppering for many decades. And perhaps if someone's listening who works for the police force, they might disagree. And I guess there are a lot more checks and balances now, but that's something that the corruption has definitely been going on for a long time and probably still goes on in a lot of countries today. So I don't think we could ever get to a point, certainly not with a human police force. Yeah, we could never get to a point where I could say 100% yes, I think the death penalty should be brought back and is a safe and reliable means of crime prevention. I can't agree with that.
Well, let's put it this way. If just say someone did kill your parents and they went to the court and the court said, right, you get the death penalty, would you be stepping up and saying, no, don't do it?
That is an interesting moral quandary, isn't it? Does it make you as bad as they are?
The way this society operates criminal justice system, well, we operate under this retribution theory, which is where a crime is punished by some form of retribution to restore the
restitution.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I do mean retribution, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Okay.
And retribution is the important keyword here, and it's used within law. So they're punished by some form of retribution to restore this equilibrium of the outraged society that the crime causes. So this originates back from something called the lex talionis, which actually means law of retribution. And retribution means they deserve to suffer. And this is based on Exodus, which is Mosaic law, your favorite thing, the Bible, an eye for an eye, certainly in this country. So if someone does harm, then they can be harmed back. That's what underpins this. Then within our criminal justice system, we have the idea of deterrence theory, which is the hope that we will prevent crime. So things like you might see like a cutout Bobby in the supermarket. That's just there as a visual deterrent to remind people in the back of their
that's CCTV, isn't it?
CCTV,
the
exactly.
original purpose of it was to deter crime. I mean, now it's used to deter lots of other things, isn't it? And to monitor citizens. These lead into dark avenues, man.
They do, yeah.
Well, our sort of crime prevention society has led to a sort of assault on, I guess it's led to an assault on personal freedoms, isn't it? I don't know where you were going with this diatribe, but I'm going to cut in because I've just been thinking about the coronavirus crisis, actually, and the fines levied against citizens for ostensibly breaking very confusing coronavirus laws. Now, I'm actually a supporter of punitive fines. So, like, if you're not wearing a mask without reason, £50 fine, whatever, yeah. But these sort of £10,000 fines for drinking a coffee like 3 miles away from your home whilst looking at a sundial, they're a bit ridiculous, aren't they? And I think if those are designed to prevent crime, then they need to be a lot clearer. And
that's punishment because they're issuing the fine. So that would be part of retribution theory, rather than a deterrent.
It's a deterrent, isn't it? It's a deterrent in itself. Then, all right, a COVID marshal is a deterrent, then, isn't it? Because a COVID marshal is someone who walks around saying,
"You can't do this. You're too close. You need to be breathing over there,"
or whatever. And I know that some of it is actually quite useful, and I do agree with some of the rhetoric. But I think we've got to be careful not to sort of fall into the sort of Robespierrean utopianist sort of idea of like, oh well, we can prevent all forms of criminality and we can control everyone's like tiny like movement, and it's micromanagement of humans within a society, isn't it? And it just can't be done by other humans. It's just too many variables.
Yeah, and so we've got that like deterrence theory, which is, you know, so far we've got retribution theory, which is what underpins our criminal justice system anyway, that punishment is justifiable harm to a perpetrator. We've got deterrence theory, that is these mechanisms that aim to prevent crime. Then we've got rehabilitation theory, which is designed to less about punishing, but more about trying to make people better so that they don't commit crime. And I'd say, like a good rational centrist, that a mixture of three is the best. But our institutions haven't really transformed to be more humane, but just to be more efficient, which is where Foucault went. But I think people do require punishment, and it's interesting to think what successful forms of punishment are. But as part of that punishment, rehabilitation and deterrence should be working symbiotically to achieve that. So I'm a bit of a mixture of all of them, really. Michel Foucault said something like punishment, like forced labor or imprisonment, is this loss of liberty, and it's never actually functioned without an additional element of punishment that concerns the body itself. So you get like this rationing of food, you get social deprivation, get locked up into smaller cells. But he said there's still a trace of torture in these modern mechanisms of criminal justice.
We are a lot more humane, like certainly in the United Kingdom as our example. I mean, some might say that we're too lax now in terms of what
Would you say we're too lax?
Okay, so I've never been into prison. A lot of this comes from second and third hand information. So I actually know, I'm not going to name any names here, obviously. I mean, if people are listening and they know me, then they might glean who this is from a story, but we'll keep it nice and simple. So I know a guy whose brother was involved in a car accident and a guy was killed. The brother was quite young and they went to court, obviously, because it was a death. And the judge essentially was quite sympathetic. And he said that the only reason he was imposing a custodial sentence, because it wasn't anyone's fault, it was basically he misjudged the turning, driving the correct speed for the road, etc. Just a bit young, misjudged the turning, and the judge said the only reason he had to impose a custodial sentence was because a man's life had been taken. So this guy ended up doing perhaps 3 years for manslaughter, something like that, for dangerous driving. And one of his stories from in the prison, he had several, and the one I found interesting actually was that he gained several A levels whilst in the prison, which is an example of rehabilitation, isn't it? He basically gained the grades he missed out on taking during that time of his life, I guess, or perhaps he continued doing what he was doing before he went to prison. The story I found most interesting was a tale he told when he came out of a riot that happened within the prison, and for whatever reason, some of the prisoners had rebelled. They barricaded themselves in the wing. They didn't take any hostages. They simply locked the guards out of the wing and proceeded to essentially run amok and destroy and damage elements within the prison. Now, this brother was in his cell, and he said that one of the ringleaders of the riot knocked on his door, and he opened the door ajar because obviously they'd unlocked all the electronic locks or whatever. Yeah. So he opened his door, and the guy said, in very polite terms, said, "Excuse me, would you like to join our riot?" And the brother goes, "Well, I'm all right, actually. Like, I'm out in 6 months, so I don't want to get anything out of it." And the guy went, "Okay, cool," and just carried on down the wing with a burning torch in his hand. Now, I find that quite bizarre as an anecdote, really, because you hear about prisons, don't you, as these sort of like dark places where everyone smokes spice and like there's lots of stabbings and stuff like that. And the anecdotes I get, or the sort of feeling I get from that anecdote, is that actually it's more of a sort of surreal sort of holiday camp almost, where you're kind of forced to stay there, and every so often the people get sick and tired of it, and they cause a bit of trouble, but they don't actually do too much damage, because there's been lots of minor prison riots over the years, haven't they? They climb onto roofs and they demand access to phones and stuff like that. So I can see that some people might say, that we are a bit too lenient, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're still locked away. You've still got restrictions on your freedoms. You've still got restrictions on what you can and cannot do. You're not supposed to be able to use the internet normally. You're not supposed to be able to just watch Sky TV or any DVDs that you want. You wouldn't have Netflix or Amazon. I mean, you can't use the late stage capitalist system of Amazon Prime, so you can't get stuff delivered to your cell door. I mean, you can't get takeaways. I mean, there are lots of things that people take for granted on the outside, let's say, that you lose access to. So maybe in terms of, in relation to our current paradigm, our current zeitgeist, then I'd say that actually your liberties are constrained, and I think rightly so, obviously, but I wouldn't say that we're particularly lenient, I guess. There are obviously exceptions you can take to that rule. The problem I have with our justice system is how it interprets events. Do you remember Tony Martin, the guy whose house was burgled like 3 or 4 times, and in the end he hid under the stairs with a shotgun, and lo and behold, someone tried to burgle his house again, and he killed one of the burglars. Now, the reason he was done for murder was that the guy, he shot him in the back, essentially. The guy was already running out of his house here. But I think we should have similar laws to America in that instance, where if someone breaks into your home, it doesn't even have to be your home, your friend's home, somewhere where you're enjoying your own liberty, you're not attempting to assault anyone or endanger anyone, and someone else, a stranger, comes into your home and attacks you, I don't think you should be prosecuted if you kill the person who came into your area, your home.
So in that regard, then you do believe in the death penalty, which is fine.
Well, no, because it's not the justice system arbitrarily executing someone. No, because
if the justice system allows it, then it is.
No, because you have, in that instant, you have returned to the Hobbesian state of nature. You have returned to an area where there is no police or justice system. Because in the time,
there is.
So listen, hear me out. If someone kicks the door in, let's say you're at 2 meters from your phone, you're a meter from the kitchen. You've got a kitchen knife, like you can grab a knife. Guy comes in, girl comes in, they're armed with a knife or a hammer, and they attack you. You're not going to phone the police, are you? You're going to defend yourself. And if in the act of defending yourself, you kill someone who has come into your home to steal things from you or to murder you, then you are not responsible for taking their life because you have defended yourself.
I think you are still responsible because you're still in control. But Gav, I'm not saying that what you're saying is wrong or immoral.
But you are saying that that's the death. You're saying
I am saying, you are applying the death penalty.
No.
You're taking the laws into your own hands, and
I disagree because you're not in an area. No,
so you're not killing them.
You are killing them, but you're
Right.
not.
Is that
the
death?
law is the law is not applicable if someone comes into your living area and assaults you. You are not responsible for their death. They are responsible for their death. It's the same as the argument we had last week.
Well, no, because if you weren't there, then they wouldn't die.
You're doing ridiculous hoop jumping there to move the argument. You're moving the goalposts. That is moving the goalposts. Oh, you should have left. You should have been out.
No, I'm not. I didn't say that. I didn't say you should leave or you should be out.
Let's bring it back to logical reasoning again. Yeah. So let's go back to what we discussed last week in our last podcast.
Just quickly, can you hold that thought and let me just go back to the prison? So just like my experiences of prisons are a little bit different. Well, kind of a little bit different. Like I see them as like for the most part, and I've been in the prisons like through my work, and yeah, they're not actually these places where people go, oh, it's like a holiday camp. Well, you do get little perks. And you can get different cells, and some people are treated differently, and some are treated better than others. But then there are the other side of it, is where your liberty is taken away, where you are getting rationing of food, where to an element you are getting sexual deprivation, and you're being punished in the solitary confinement. I've got two mates who worked as prison guards. I'm not going to say any more about it because some of it is quite controversial, but they said fights, stabbings is a daily occurrence, and there's been times when they have to protect themselves. And the other thing on top of that is the spice issue, like drugs. There is a police crime commissioner who says that if the movement of drugs stops going into prisons, then prisons would all be rioting. There's actually this odd dynamic where they are one of the only things keeping prisons to a level that is manageable.
That's completely different from my anecdotal experience. And so we've got, well, there you go. And we're back to Bertrand Russell, aren't we? We've got to take those two experiences of prisons and we've got to combine them into a logical sort of idea of what they're actually,
both of them were.
Both of them correct. Yeah.
You gave an anecdotal story about one particular incident, but your friend arguably might have saw a lot more in it, but didn't have time to tell you about it.
Yeah, so, of course, that's true.
But both of those things can happen within a prison, and I'm sort of agreeing with you that prisons aren't all rainbows and roses.
Oh, of course,
nor should they necessarily should be. But and just to clarify, like, so I'm saying on the death penalty, if someone walked into your room now and threatened you and you killed them, I wouldn't judge you for that, and I don't think you should be prosecuted by the law for doing that. As long as you can prove that. You know, it is self-defense and you don't know this person, etc., etc.
But you would still say that is
the death penalty. I don't see how you can say that you'd be willing to kill someone for coming into your home, but that the state can't execute.
You don't have a choice, do you? Because you've been.
You do. You do have a choice. And
lie down and let them stab.
No. But not even that. You're saying even if they break in the house and they might not be meaning to kill you, but
but you don't know their intentions, and this is what I'm saying.
You don't. But you can
returning to Hobbesian state of nature because
you're not saying
it's been left outside. It's been left outside.
Well, I don't know.
The law is to apply often after the event, isn't it? So
you can negotiate, and there are crimes where people have broken into houses and they've come across a little old lady, and there was one recently in Ireland, and they actually become like best of friends, and nothing happened in it. So there is always the ability to talk your way out of these things. So I'm saying you cannot say you're against the death penalty and then say that it's okay to kill someone if they come in your house if they break in.
You can't also say that you can always talk your way out of these things.
No, you can. You can't always. No.
Exactly. So at some instances you're going to have to use violence.
Yeah, and you are taking the law into your own hands.
I think in America it's a land of violence. Yeah, so I think they've got some of these things right though, because in a lot of states in America you can't be prosecuted for defending yourself on your own property, and I think that should be the case in the United Kingdom. That's quite a right-wing thing to say, I guess.
Well, not if you look at it's underlined by the Constitution, so it's not really right-wing. But
but it is in terms of say our more liberal democratic views in say Europe, where there are people are like Tony Martin are taken to court for essentially defending themselves on their own property, and you could argue with Tony Martin that he'd been a victim so many times that he'd become essentially paranoid and scared of being a victim again, and he was a victim again. But I wanted to bring your comments on that sort of enacting the death penalty. I wanted to bring them back to something we discussed last week, which was the incident of the girl in America who was shot dead whilst attempting to stab two other people. Now, this is what I mean about the criminal taking responsibility for their own actions. So this is why I think that if I were to kill someone in my home, it's their responsibility for coming into my home, just as the girl that was shot by the police in America, it was her responsibility for not dropping the knife or lying down, or it's her responsibility for assaulting or attempting to assault those two people with a bladed object to begin with. So, like you said last week, she's taken the ultimate responsibility for her actions because she's lost her life. Now, people obviously are disagreeing whether or not the police officer should have discharged her, but I would say that he didn't have a choice, because if another person's life is threatened, he has to act. And it'd be the same way if your own life and other family members' lives are threatened in your own home, you have to act. The responsibility of death, as it were, isn't on you. It's on the person who decided not to obey the laws of the land and who decided to go against the collective consciousness of society by committing these acts that we have collectively agreed are wrong.
I understand that. I agree that it is the responsibility of the individual going around who committing the crime, that it's their responsibility to take what punishments come in the way. And if that's death, then that's death. However, all I'm saying is that there is no difference between someone going through the court system and being given the death penalty compared to someone breaking into a house and then getting shot and being given the death penalty that way. There's no difference. And I don't think...
But what about due process? Like the difference there is...
Well, you've done due process, haven't you?
No, you've been forced into an action by determinism. So you are forced to defend yourself. That's not due process. It's almost like you return to a time without due process. So return to the Middle Ages. Like if you stab someone who was trying to rob you in the Middle Ages, I suppose that's your due process then, in a way. So maybe I've agreed with you then in a sort of strange...
That's what I'm trying to say.
Way. Maybe that is your due process. But
yeah.
I don't know.
No, it is. That's what I'm going at. And there's no difference between a policeman pulling out a gun and shooting someone dead when you could actually incapacitate. If someone breaks in your house and you had a taser or a gun, which one would you go for? Well, actually, you have a choice there. You can either incapacitate them or you kill them and carry out the death penalty. All I'm saying is thus that you actually do believe in the death penalty, and that's fine.
I love how you've reached this conclusion, man. You can reach any conclusion you want at any time.
You are basically Adolf Hitler incarnate. No, but you see what
gave it away.
You're not. I know you. I know, and I know you're not. And of course, you're not a fascist. And it doesn't just because you believe in the death penalty, but you are saying de facto that you are allowed to have your due process and administer the death penalty for someone breaking into your home. Who am I to tell you can't do that? Gav, if someone broke into your house right now and you were screaming, going, please don't hurt me, and you accidentally killed them, well, they have taken that act to break into your house. You've defended yourself. And the
problem is, isn't it? I'm still going to be taken to court, aren't I?
Well, you might get away with it in the UK as long as they're not running away.
Tony Martin,
that was a very important piece.
His conviction was quashed, wasn't it, in the end? Because it was proved that essentially he had simply defended his home. And he didn't intend on killing the person. He just fired at the people coming in, or the shapes coming in his stairs, essentially.
But what he changed, what that actual case changed in law is that you are allowed to actually fight back using reasonable force, that is a very complicated thing to sort of...
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
If they're not running away from you. So if they're running away from you and now you kill someone, then you can go to jail.
Actually, you're right there. That's reminded me of a case I read about a few weeks ago, actually, of a guy who essentially just committed criminal damage, ran into a shop and smashed some TVs and various other stuff up. And he was actually pursued by security in a van, who then pinned him to the floor. The guy who committed the vandalism ended up dying. This is a really sad case, actually, from memory, because the two people that assaulted him, one of them is now in jail for like a decade for manslaughter, and the other killed himself before the trial because he felt so bad, or perhaps he knew he was going to go to prison and couldn't tolerate that, so he ended his own life. So it's complex, isn't it? Because that, I think in that instance, you probably have gone too far there, because you can detain someone in citizen's arrest, but you can't execute them for smashing a TV up. I mean, it's unreasonable, isn't it? It's an unreasonable use of force there. I mean, do you agree? Like, would you say that theft and vandalism is something punishable by almost accidental death? I mean, is it I suppose it is. The criminal must take some responsibility there. But, I mean,
if there's an accidental death, that has to be taken into consideration. Our law system is quite antiquated, but it does carry quite a good process for trying to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the person is involved in all these little complicated nuances of law, and it will be analysed and evidence will be given. In terms of the punishment people get, well, there's two things we can look at here that are quite interesting. The first is, like in Moscow, they've got this super prison where it's more like a university. And there's some Nordic countries that do the same. So say you kill someone, you're going to get punished, but you're going to come out with a degree. So I think there's a way forward there. And I think that's not a bad place to start. And the same in Moscow, it's like a super prison, but it's more like a hotel. It's got heated floors. But they're seeing that crime rates are decreasing in that certain area, or basically people who have been sent to that particular prison are less likely to go on and commit other crimes. Because if you send someone who's angry into prison, well, prison's quite an angry place. You're going to come out angry, and without the right support, you are going to just stay in this
But
life
you're going
of
to
crime.
re-offend, aren't you?
Yeah,
the re-offending rates
and
are quite high, aren't they? But isn't that also a factor of determinism that we kind of glossed over a little bit today? The fact that often if you send someone to prison for X amount of years, they'll come out with no economic foothold. They've probably got no close support network. So they're inevitably going to drift towards the behaviours that led them into prison in the first place. Or perhaps they'll become even worse because they literally turn up almost out of time, don't they? If you go to prison for 20 years and you come out again, the world has moved beyond what you're used to. So you almost become institutionalized. Well, you have become institutionalized. And that's the common trope, isn't it? That people do become institutionalized in their time in prison and they can't move on.
Yeah, well, luckily we're quite fortunate in this country. Like, as I said to you before, I worked at probation office for about 4 years. There are some very good people in probation, very hardworking people who are there to try and help and turn people's lives around. There are some crimes that will absolutely disgust us. And when we think of the worst crime possible you can think of, I know what I'm thinking in my head. And you know,
we're all probably thinking of the same thing, aren't we?
Yeah, so some people are, I think, sadly, just you cannot rehabilitate all people. That is just a fact of life. Controversial, call it what you like. It's something that everyone in probation, everyone in the jail service knows, but society is scared to say. And then we think, what do we do with these people? So in Amsterdam, for example, they were doing, say, people like doing drugs. They created a container ship village. We spoke about this before. And they sent all these, I quote, undesirables to that certain location to live separately. And they did a pedophile village in America, the same sort of thing. You know, they send all these pedophiles to a certain place and they keep them there and they sort of segregate them. And it's actually been quite effective. Alcoholics in Amsterdam, they created services where if someone's an alcoholic in Amsterdam, don't have anywhere to live, they give you a job picking litter and they reward you by giving you beer back. That's actually proven to work. Controversial though, Gavin.
They live in a wet house, don't they?
Yeah. And we used to have wet houses here.
Yeah.
So it's controversial, but that
is controversial, isn't it? Because that would essentially sort of negate all of the sort of health drives to stop people becoming alcoholics in the first place. It doesn't negate it, but it kind of says, well, most people will succeed, but a certain percentage of people will always fail. So we have to make, I don't even think that's controversial because that's making provision in society to ensure that certain groups of people who are vulnerable to addiction are cared for properly.
Well, the difficult part there is that like a lot of the left wing would say, well, all you're doing is actually enabling the behavior. And in a way, they're right. I don't know if it's actually caring for people to give them a place where they're allowed to carry on the destructive behaviors that are societally seen as undesirable. But, you know, I know exactly what you mean as well. And I'd say there's good evidence to suggest that wet houses, although they are dysfunctional places, they did provide a certain level that, you know, with some people, you need somewhere like that. There are just people who want to choose to live how they want to live, and if that's drug addiction or alcohol addiction, and we should have places to accommodate that. In Portugal, they have decriminalized a lot of the drugs, and I think that's a good move forward. That's a very liberal idea, and I think it's good. To me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, that eliminates lots of avenues for criminals to make money as well, doesn't it? Because if you've legalized stuff that's illegal, then the government's receiving tax benefits from these products, and criminals can't operate a clandestine empire with violence selling them anyway. So all this stuff about county lines that we see in the UK would essentially disappear overnight if we simply legalized all these substances, and the quality would increase as well because you wouldn't have people overdosing because it would be made by although saying that though, it would be made, I'm just about to say it'd be made by a reputable firm. Well, that's bollocks as well, isn't it? Because we've seen how pharmaceutical companies have essentially poisoned millions of people across the globe with opioids and various other synthetic drugs. So I can imagine if we gave them control of Class A's, then they would just pump out as much as they could. I mean, it would probably return to an era where they were putting cocaine in Coca-Cola again. I mean, perhaps we might return to that era again in the future. Who knows, man?
There's two further parts to this I think is quite interesting. Well, Nietzsche said that evil, like the glaciers, which one day helped to form forests, they are like this wild destructive force which is needed so that milder civilizations can one day establish cities there. So like out of terrible wars, we get goodness. And it's the same with Durkheim again, is that crime is necessary to an extent to actually thrust civilization forward to come up with new ways of dealing with new problems. So that's the first part, is that while we detest crime, we recognize it's harmful. It's quite a controversial notion itself. There's actually an element of it that's required for society to progress, both in scientific ways and, say, moralistic ways. And the second interesting thing is Meremy said that evil is mostly committed for sheer pleasure, aesthetic morality, and that tyranny over self is a neurotic form of the will to power. And the question out that I sort of raise is that, we should decriminalize drugs. Yes, we should think about what it means to defend ourselves and our homes, for example. But the tricky one is, what do we do with people like pedophiles and those who are just not going to be rehabilitated? What do we do with those people, Gav?
Well, I mean, in America, they've got the prison industrial complex, haven't they? Where they've taken this to an extreme, I guess, haven't they? Where they kind of label a lot of people who've committed minor offences as unsavable. I mean, look at Kamala Harris, the Democratic vice president, and when she was a judge for quite some years, and she was well known for her ridiculously harsh sentencing, where she would literally just bang you up for 10 years
for smoking dope.
Yeah, exactly. People say she's a liberal. Think again, guys. But I don't think that's the right thing to do, especially not with minor offences. But when you talk about the ones we're all thinking of, like the paedophilia and the rapists and the murderers, I mean, what do we do with people who, I mean, sometimes through their own volition are seen as incurable, I guess, or they can't reintegrate with civilized society? So I don't know. I mean, as rational centrists, we should be able to come up with something that will please both sides, please those that want to see harsher punishments and please those that want to see rehabilitation. We've got to sit somewhere in the middle, man. We've got to give them something, maybe give them something useful to do. I mean, this is quite a capitalist idea, but maybe they could form part of the first Martian colonies. I mean, look at this. Is
that a good idea?
It's a bit of a leap there, but look at Australia. Yeah, so Australia was used as a prison colony for many centuries by the United Kingdom, and it's quite a functional nation state now. I mean, I'm not saying that we could literally shove 100 prisoners into the ISS and fire it off the Mars and expect to have a functioning colony within 20 years. But I mean, we could try and send these people off. This is a very fascist comment now, but I mean, if we see them as expendable, then we may as well use them in a
penal
battalions way. Yeah, I mean, the Soviets used them to clear mines. So, oh god,
oh, no.
Stalin.
I think we both know, like, pull it back and sort of step away from the edge of oblivion. When I do my job, I really do try and believe that everyone can change. I try and put aside what they've done is when they come out, they've served their time, and that's that. And I focus on that, and I try not to judge them on that. And, I'd be lying if I say I don't, because that's impossible. No one can do that. But I aim to do it, and I do aim to try and be as civil and as kind as I possibly can to them in that moment. And I look at work. I do focus a lot on the rehabilitative aspect of it, but I also focus on the restorative aspect of it, which is something we haven't touched upon yet. And I'm a big believer in this sort of restorative justice, where it's not going to work in every case, especially more sexual cases. But say if you went out and burgled an old lady, well, I think the old lady should decide what your punishment is. And if that lady says, well, I want him to come and clear my garden up for a year, so be it.
Isn't that quite a dangerous road to go down, though? Because most people, when given that choice, would make not split-second judgments, but they could. I wouldn't trust the average neoliberal, indoctrinated identitarian to make a logical choice, because you could have people saying, "Oh, just let them go," and he's someone that's like.
And you're right. The important part there is, again, like how we manage with democracies. We change the parameters of what we offer people. So what we don't give them an option to say we let them go. But we say, right, you can either choose they mow your lawn for a year, or you send them off to Mars in a colony. What do you want to choose?
Okay, yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and that's interesting actually. Do you know if that's been tried at all?
Oh
Like,
yeah, we're doing
yeah?
restorative justice now. So it happens now. Anyone at home, if you're interested in it, I recommend checking it out. And there's really good evidence to show that once a punishment has taken place, say in like a prison sentence, for example, then you can begin this rehabilitative aspect and restorative aspect of saying, come on, you can do more now. Like, do you want that opportunity to take it? And if a prisoner says yeah, then they can have an option to write a letter of apology. They can even agree to meet the victim, and that happens.
Yeah, okay,
and it's successful.
Yeah, I can imagine that will be, wouldn't it? Because it's closure, isn't it, for both criminal and victim? Because they're trying to understand each other, and this is again, we always come back to just Bertrand Russell, because you've got to understand the other person's point of view, and if you don't do that, then you're going to be stuck in your own narrow viewpoint. I just quick caveat. I think it's important that we're talking a lot about prisons, aren't we, today, and about restorative justice and so on. I do think something we've skipped. It just reminded me when I was talking about Kamala Harris is the privatization of prisons, and I think this is something that's become a serious problem in late stage capitalist society. I mean, look at last year during the peak of the coronavirus pandemic in America. They were forcing prisoners. Well, I say forcing. They were just getting prisoners to burn bodies, and although you might argue that this is a good punishment for someone that's possibly been sentenced to a violent crime. Yeah, someone that, say, I don't know, stole a Twinkie that's being forced to bury thousands of bodies day in, day out. Yeah, I don't think that's fair, to be honest with you.
So the punishment doesn't fit the crime there?
No, certainly not in this aspect. And I think the way we got to that point is the fact that because of the school to prison system that operates in poorer areas of America, and to be fair, in poor areas of the United Kingdom, we could argue this also happens, is that people who don't have the same opportunities and who haven't had a particularly good education and who often have a very fragmented upbringing, like we discussed in the more extreme cases with Ed Kemper last week. These people often, this make a slide into crime. They might make one or two serious mistakes, and they end up in jail. And I think that they get stuck there then because of the fact they're treated as a commodity by the private prisons, especially in America. I mean, I don't know how far this has gone in the UK. I mean, do we make our prisoners work in the UK?
Yeah, well, you don't make them work. So normally what happens if you go into prison in the UK, and there are many private run prisons, is that you can take on a job. Like you could go and work in the laundry department, you could do cleaning, you could be involved in chaperoning new prisoners around, and you get a small amount of pay. And you think, fair enough. But you're not made to. But you are. Whereas you might get a suspended sentence and then be given community service of like cleaning up,
Yeah, sure. That makes sense.
Football pitch.
That makes sense anyway. But what I'm sort of talking about is the sort of places in, probably I guess only in the States then, where there's big factory complexes. Like, I mean, this is again a bit of a stretch, but like what you had in Auschwitz-Birkenau and Belsen, where companies IG Farben and other large technical and chemical companies, industrial companies, would come and build factories next to a concentration camp, and they'd get people to work in those factories as slave labor. And in America, when you break rocks and when you bury bodies, I mean, there is no real difference there. I mean, look at the dissonance on display in the US government, where they chastised China for making Uyghur Muslims work in camps in China, obviously making phones or whatever. They are literally forced to make things. And the same thing happens to poor Black, Latin and white Americans. And I think it's total hypocrisy and total dissonance from sort of Joe Biden and probably from any other administration, in the fact that they don't recognize that their own country is just as guilty of exploitation of the poor working class as the Politburo in China is. I don't know if you agree with me there.
Yeah, I do. And, look at Joseph Stalin and the railway. I believe that was built by slave labor, by the prison labor.
Well,
they had penal battalions as well. So they'd have like people at the front line who wouldn't have weapons, and they just go out and get killed.
Human shield.
Human shield. So there's an element where we're a bit more sensible than that, and that's refreshing, isn't it? Right, because we're actually calling out this mass movement where they just see the prison population disposable, whereas actually what they should be doing is sort of this. It's tricky because they should be doing a lot of restorative justice, but at the same time, you sort of think, well, if you've got a population that is idling in a prison and a new motorway needs building.
Yeah, I mean, that's a dangerous road to go down, isn't it, though? Because
let's go down
that is that is fascism, true and true. That isn't it? Forcing people to work on a project for nothing, essentially, simply because they've committed them.
Are they getting nothing if they get their bed and breakfast?
That's true, isn't it? I suppose. I mean, yeah, we could just literally leave them to starve to death. So that is an interesting moral quandary.
But also, I think when we always see these bits in the paper and we see a sentence and we always hear the family was disappointed in the outcome. And, and I get that. And I think they should be disappointed. And that's where I think we need this restorative aspect. And we need justice really put back into the hands of the people where we give them choices that are sensible, not like, oh, what do you want them to do? Boil to death? No, it'd be, it'd be like, what punishment do you want? Do you want them just to have like a straight 15 years in jail? Or do you want them to maybe that they can only leave jail after having like 2 degrees, for example? Okay. Something like that. That's realistic and more tailored to the individual. And then they can actually choose and say, well, that motorway needs building. So I need a patio.
I guess
concreted.
All right, Fred West. When we're talking about prisoners building roads, actually, that's actually put another idea into my head. Actually, the encroach of automation in our society now will lead to a lot of these jobs being redundant anyway, and probably will lead to an increase in crime. So I think these are questions we're going to have to answer a lot sooner than we realize as a culture, because when we get to sort of an unemployment rate of like 20% in like 10 years, when all the baristas, all the bar staff, all the laborers, all the I say unskilled, I don't believe there's any such thing as unskilled labor, but let's use the capitalist definition of unskilled labor. Once that's all been taken over by machines and other automated systems, then what are these people going to do for work? And a lot of people will turn to crime because they won't have any other options, because by this point our society will be quite possibly on the verge of collapse. So how are we going to deal with this vast influx of prisoners into the prison system's already overcrowded in this perhaps because of the way that we classify crime, but also perhaps because we can already see this social decay that Durkheim called the anomie. We can see it happening right now in front of us, in the fact that the sort of moral fabric of our culture is disintegrating, and as a result more people are resorting to behaviors that we see as offending the collective consciousness because of a lack of opportunity elsewhere. Actually thinking about robots, do you think we should replace judge and justices with like an automated system? Do you think that would be more fair, like, than the human touch? Or would that be completely arbitrary? We're going to see, like robotic receptionists soon, aren't we? So why not robotic judges?
Well, it's hard to say, but I think the key thing that underpins our crime and punishment system is that you have a jury, and that the people decide. So you might be actually taking away, but juries have got it wrong as well.
Of course they have, haven't they? Look at O.J. Simpson. Anyone that thinks that O.J. Simpson was innocent after he wrote a book after the event that he was cleared, essentially saying how he would do it, and then he got sent to prison probably it must have been about 10 years ago now, for an armed robbery, stealing back some of his own memorabilia from some guy that he bought it from. Anyone that thinks he was not guilty of killing his wife, Nicole Simpson, allegedly, I think should think again, personally.
Yeah,
but
I think you're right.
Like you said, a jury. Now, this is really interesting because the jury essentially used the race card. They agreed with O.J. Simpson's lawyers, and they said the only reason why he was fitted up for the murder was that he was black. And I would say, well, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. There was so much evidence available. The motive was so strong. There's some ridiculous, like, blood on the car that he drove up in before he went to the airport. There was Nicole Simpson's blood was found on the door handle. It was in the car, like fresh blood. Anyway, this is a very specific case, but in my opinion, the jury got it wrong in that case anyway, and they've got it wrong in lots of other cases where they've sentenced someone or a group of people. And sometimes you can argue that that's reverse racism. So in America, where a white jury would sentence a black man in, say, the 1930s for a rape just because he was black. That's another example of jury essentially doing something that ridiculous. They shouldn't be doing. It's something ridiculous. Yeah, I
think what it comes down to in terms of the death penalty, well, we can sort of remove the issue of whether or not we have an AI judge or not, by saying if we don't have the death penalty, then we need to have a society that does believe in that people can be rehabilitated, and that does give people a second, sometimes a third chance, and does invest money into the education of the people leaving prison. And I like that. And I think that I've seen that work, and I've been a part of that and try to help rehabilitate people in sort of helping people not reoffend just by getting them a job, just by listening to them, just by sort of investing some semblance of time in them. So if we don't have the death penalty, we need to take that stance, I think, in a more rational centrist approach to retribution theory, to rehabilitation theory, and to deterrence theory, and combine them, and also add that restorative justice aspect to it to create a much more balanced form of how we punish people.
And we need to get privatization out of the prison.
Get privatized.
I think so anyway.
No, I think you're right. Get privatization out of it. But if we are going to say, well, we need the death penalty, then that takes all that issue away, because you just kill them, right? So it's a very tricky bit. But the reason why I probably prefer saying let's invest money and time in people, it's probably better for the economy, although it's probably not good for like the natalist argument that we'll come to later. But if we focus more on actually educating people, giving them a decent education, and making sure that you said earlier, and this is probably one of the most important parts, that we give people this outcome of opportunity and make sure there are more opportunities available for people. That is probably the most efficient way to reduce crime.
It is, isn't it? And in that, I think we actually agree with many of the commentators today. We are in agreement with some of the more liberal and leftist elements of our society there, that we agree that if you level the playing field, crime will go down.
And that's where that rational centrism perspective comes in. We're saying, yeah, we do agree. There does need to be like punishment for people, but there also needs to be this more restorative and rehabilitative aspect of punishment as well. So you remember earlier you won that prize.
You're
now the Emperor of England. So
you are now Gavlar, the 5th Emperor of the fallen state of England. In your wake of a power vacuum after a mass extinction event, you have won the game show and seized power, and are now presiding over a gladiatorial arena system in the wake of a working court system. You, the Emperor, have dictatorial powers over punishments for crime, and you will now hear these crimes and deal out the punishment you deem fit.
Hand Matt Cox beyond Thunderdome.
Presiding over this duty to you, dear law-abiding citizens, is your great Emperor, Gavin the 5th. On this day, reach back to the hallowed antiquity to bring before you criminals of various shapes and sizes. On the barren straits of the Thames, there stood the insidious armies of barbarian villains, the ferocious criminals from all corners of our land, bent on destruction of our glorious state. Your Emperor, Gavin the 5th, is pleased to give you the trials of the barbarian lord.
Address the crowd, my lord.
Greetings, sewer dwellers. I am your Emperor.
Thank you, my lord. Calm down, everyone. This first man is a man who murdered 27 people, all women and children. My lord, your options for execution are Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts, or sawing in half. Which one do you choose, my lord?
I choose sawing in half, saw him in two, and post his body to both corners of my empire.
His will be done. Sawing in half.
Next is a man who stole some bread from a child, and he later died of starvation. The child died of starvation. What is the sentence, my lord? You have a choice out of tarring and feathering, boiling alive, or you can let him go free. But if you let him go free, the Senate and the public will be very upset, and public disorder will increase by 50%.
This is like a game of Civilization 4. It's going to have to be tarred and feathered.
Tarring and feathering, my lord, that's terrible.
Well, he did steal some bread, so get on with it. Or I'll have you tarred and feathered.
Very well.
Get on with it!
Very well, my lord.
Tar and feather him.
This isn't very nice. Next is a woman you may recognize, my lord. She was homeless and she was abused and raped as she was growing up. She had a terrible life of addiction. She had all her hands chopped off. But she did try and murder you. Well, kind of allegedly. And she set part of your house on fire, but no one was harmed. Your choice of punishments are to grill iron her or hang her.
Well, she tried to grill me, so put her in the grill and add some children in as well.
My lord, but the crowd won't be happy about the children.
Put the crowd in the grill!
My lord, that might take some time. But you could let her go.
Well, I'm not going to let go because I'm the emperor, and why should I let anyone go now that I'm in a position of true power? Put her in the grill, or I'll put you in the grill.
Quite right, my lord. Your mercy knows no bounds. And lastly is the leader of an underground terrorist cell. Someone who wants to overthrow and kill you. Not only that, but he is also responsible for organising the bomb that detonated in central Gavdon, killing 5 people. Your choices of punishment include tarring and feathering, flaying, or, which is stripping all his skin off while he's alive, or sentencing him to a life in a uranium mine, my lord.
Oh, well, we always need some new nuclear weapons, so I think a lifetime mining uranium will be sufficient for this man.
Very good, my lord.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You didn't give me many options other than gruesome punishments, but this actually ties into a mechanic that I understand quite well, and this is a mechanic of how all dictatorships are run. I've made an assumption that as Emperor of England, I would be some sort of like sole ruler, I guess, and you actually have to make some pretty harsh decisions. If you're a dictator, in order to secure your own power base, you tend to have to murder opponents and create a climate of fear. So in North Korea, the incumbent dictator is currently Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un had his uncle executed with a 40mm anti-aircraft gun. Yeah? And the reason for that wasn't simply because, well, I'd imagine it wasn't simply because he enjoyed it. It was to secure his power base. And I guess as an emperor, like the options you get for punishment are probably quite limited, and you've essentially got to be harsh. Otherwise, the crowd are going to turn against you, aren't they? So,
especially in
a barbaric, like post-technological society, then there isn't. We return further back to the sort of Hobbesian state of nature. Well, he wrote at the time of the English Civil War, didn't he? And that's essentially what happened there. Is that the laws and punishments became a lot more severe because it was either my way or your way, wasn't it? The ability of people to to rationalize and to try and work out a way out of the constitutional crisis had come to an end. They'd reached an impasse, which then led to the violence of the English Civil War.
What we can also see there is, and I think that's a very good, succinct rundown there, which is leading nicely to the end of this special edition 3-part series on crime and punishment, which is ideal with a glass of spring water and a read of the Bible before bed for everyone, is just how much, like that scenario there, just how much power can influence us. And also, we are all one step away out of being in a circumstance where we commit a crime. And we've all committed crime as well, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's very true.
Driving, I've sped.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. As soon as you're speeding, then you're offending the collective consciousness, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do you think it's important that we should differentiate there just quickly between check your power and check your privilege there? Because I don't want people getting confused there, because check your power is completely different from the concept of check your privilege in inverted commas. One of our listeners, I don't know if he's managed to make it this far this week. If you're listening, mate, well done. but he'll know exactly what I'm talking about when he asks me frequently, like how I would react in a similar situation as one you put me in our little hypothetical chat there about being Emperor of England. And I always say to him that I wouldn't put myself forward for those kind of positions because I know in my heart of hearts that given a long enough time scale, I would become as despotic and as power corrupted as the best of them. Because why wouldn't you? Because given the opportunity,
bring of Gyges.
Yeah, exactly, man. It's just a kind of reverse determinism that we've discussed often on this podcast. Yeah, I'm going to jump into a vat of pickled onions to cool down now after executing all those people.
To everyone listening, thank you to our 6 subscribers.
Tell your friends.
Yeah, do comment. Don't be afraid. Comment. Call me something rude. And if you think we've gone too bonkers, then fine. At the end of that, I think we've done quite a journey around crime and punishment. We've had some interesting little scuffles and skirmishes, and at the end of it, we've sort of synthesized this into something that's quite palatable and hopefully a bit enjoyable to listen to. I don't know. But yeah, we'll catch you all next time then.
Farewell.
Cheers and bye.